The galaxy was aflame with conflict. Across countless systems, alliances were shattered, and empires rose and fell like waves crashing against the rocks. Among the fiercest of these empires was the Syrithian Dominion, a race of powerful warriors whose strength and cunning were legendary. Their leader, the Princess Marshall, was a figure of near-mythical renown, leading her armies from the front lines with a combination of brilliance, courage, and ferocity. Her people revered her not just as royalty, but as the embodiment of their martial culture. She was tall and statuesque, her lavender-hued skin marked with intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the dim light of her command chamber. Her armor was both elegant and practical, forged from the strongest alloys of her home world and imbued with nanotechnology that enhanced her already formidable abilities. A long, curved blade rested at her side, humming softly with latent energy. The Syrithians had swept through the outer systems unchallenged, their conquests leaving a trail of defeated adversaries. But as their reach extended toward the Solarian frontier, they encountered resistance unlike anything they had faced before. The humans, though technologically inferior in many ways, fought with a tenacity that defied logic. They were stubborn, resourceful, and unyielding, a combination that turned every battle into a grueling test of endurance. The princess had grown accustomed to victory, but the humans forced her to adapt, to rethink her strategies. They had a way of exploiting weaknesses she hadn't known existed. Intrigued and frustrated, she decided to take to the battlefield herself once more, eager to see these peculiar creatures in action. The pivotal battle took place on a war-torn moon orbiting a gas giant. The landscape was a mix of jagged cliffs, sprawling craters, and swirling mists that obscured visibility. Syrithian dropships rained from the sky like falling stars, deploying wave after wave of elite troops. The humans responded with a ferocity that was almost suicidal, charging headlong into the fray despite being outnumbered and outgunned. The princess led her forces from the front, cutting through human lines with precision and grace. She moved like a dancer, her blade a blur of motion as it deflected projectiles and carved through armor. Despite the chaos around her, she remained calm, her mind focused on the battle's rhythm. Yet, for all her skill, she couldn't help but notice one human warrior who stood out among the rest. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his armor battered and scorched from countless engagements. His movements were fluid and precise, a stark contrast to the desperate scrabbling of his comrades. Armed with a long blade and a rifle, he fought with a combination of discipline and raw power that drew her attention. She observed him as he fought his way through her forces, his blade clashing against hers in a sudden, explosive confrontation. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, a meeting of predator and prey, though neither could quite decide which was which. The duel was fierce. The human was skilled, his strikes powerful and deliberate. He fought with a determination that bordered on reckless, forcing her to adjust her usual tactics. For the first time in years, the princess found herself genuinely challenged, her heart pounding as she parried his blows and countered with her own. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she managed to disarm him. His weapon clattered to the ground, and she prepared to deliver the final strike. But instead of surrendering or pleading for his life, he lunged at her with nothing but his bare hands, knocking her weapon aside and grappling her to the ground. She was stunned, not by his audacity, but by the sheer force of will that drove him. Even in the face of certain death, he refused to yield. Her respect for him grew in that moment, mingling with a strange sense of admiration. Before she could deliver a killing blow, her forces called out, signaling that the human reinforcements were retreating. She hesitated, then withdrew her blade, stepping back and allowing him to rise. He stared at her in disbelief, his breath ragged, before nodding curtly and retreating with his comrades. The princess returned to her command ship, her mind racing. She couldn't stop thinking about the human warrior, the way he fought, the fire in his eyes, the sheer force of his spirit. He was unlike anyone she had ever encountered. Despite herself, she felt a flicker of curiosity, even admiration. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed again and again. Each time, the human warrior proved himself a formidable adversary. His tactics were unconventional, his strategies unpredictable. He seemed to thrive in chaos, turning even the direst situations to his advantage. The princess found herself drawn to him, not just as an opponent, but as a kindred spirit. They were both warriors, shaped by the crucible of battle, bound by a shared respect for the art of war. She began to seek him out on the battlefield, eager to test herself against him, to learn from him. Their encounters became a kind of ritual, each one pushing them to their limits. They spoke little, their conversations carried out through the language of steel and blood. Yet over time, a strange camaraderie began to form. They were enemies, yes, but also something more. The turning point came during a climactic battle on a desolate planet. Both sides had suffered heavy losses, and the fighting was fierce. Amid the chaos, the princess and the human warrior found themselves separated from their respective forces, stranded together in a crumbling ruin. At first, they fought as they always did, their blades clashing in a storm of sparks. But as the structure began to collapse around them, they were forced to put aside their differences and work together to escape. It was an uneasy alliance, but it revealed a side of the human warrior that the princess hadn't seen before. He was resourceful and clever, his quick thinking saving them both more than once. Despite his gruff exterior, he showed a surprising sense of humor, his wry remarks bringing a smile to her lips even in the midst of danger. When they finally emerged from the ruins, battered but alive, the princess looked at him with new eyes. He was no longer just an enemy or even a rival. He was a kindred spirit, a warrior whose strength and courage matched her own. For his part, the human warrior seemed equally affected. He had seen a side of the princess that few others had, a side that was more than just the fearsome leader of an alien empire. She was intelligent, noble, and above all, fiercely loyal to her people. As they parted ways, each returning to their respective forces, they exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. It was a promise, unspoken but understood. They would meet again, not as enemies, but as equals. And perhaps, in time, as something more. The war raged on, but something had shifted. The Princess Marshall, once consumed by the singular drive of conquest, found herself distracted. Her thoughts often wandered to the human warrior, replaying their battles, their brief moments of camaraderie, and the silent understanding they had shared. She knew it was foolish. Her people would never accept such an infatuation with an enemy, but she couldn't deny the intrigue that had taken root in her heart. On the human side, the warrior faced a similar struggle. The alien princess had become more than just an opponent. She was a symbol of everything he respected in a soldier. Her honor in combat, her intelligence, and her sheer presence haunted his thoughts. Even in moments of quiet, when he should have been resting or strategizing, her image lingered. Their next meeting came unexpectedly. A massive battle had erupted in the Orion cluster, a key territory both sides sought to control. The humans had entrenched themselves in a sprawling network of caves and tunnels beneath a barren planet's surface, while the Syrithians launched a relentless assault to dislodge them. The princess led the charge, her blade cutting through the darkness like a beacon. The humans fought desperately, but the Syrithians were gaining ground. The battle pushed deeper into the tunnels, where the fighting became a brutal melee. Amid the chaos, the princess encountered the human warrior once more. Their eyes locked across the dimly lit cavern, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they moved toward each other, their weapons raised. The duel was as intense as ever, their blades clashing in a flurry of sparks and ringing steel. But this time, there was a difference. It wasn't just a contest of skill, it was a conversation. Each strike, each parry, spoke of their shared respect, their unspoken bond. The battle around them raged on, but neither paid it any mind. They fought as if they were the only two people in the universe, their movements perfectly synchronized. It was as if they were testing each other, pushing each other to the limits of their abilities. Finally, the human warrior made a bold move, disarming the princess with a swift strike. Her weapon clattered to the ground, and she stared at him in surprise. For a moment, he held his blade to her throat, his breath heavy. Then, with a slight smile, he lowered it and stepped back, offering her a chance to recover. She retrieved her weapon, but instead of attacking, she hesitated. "Why did you spare me?" she asked, her voice low and measured. He shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Would you have done the same?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswered. The sounds of battle echoed through the cavern, but neither moved. They were locked in a silent standoff, their gazes searching each other for something neither could quite define. Before they could say more, the ground trembled violently. Explosions echoed through the tunnels, and the ceiling began to collapse. Both warriors reacted instinctively, dodging falling debris and rushing toward the nearest exit. As the cavern crumbled around them, they found themselves working together once more, their movements perfectly coordinated. When they finally emerged into the open air, the battle had ended. The Syrithians had claimed victory, but at a heavy cost. The princess looked around at the devastation, her expression somber. She turned to the human warrior, who stood beside her, his own gaze distant. "This war will destroy us both," she said quietly. He nodded, his jaw tight. "Maybe it already has." For a long moment, they stood in silence, two warriors bound by a shared understanding. Then, without a word, they parted ways, each returning to their respective sides. The encounters continued, each one deepening the bond between them. They began to communicate more openly, exchanging words instead of blows. Their conversations were guarded at first, tinged with suspicion, but gradually they grew more candid. They spoke of their worlds, their people, and the burdens they carried as leaders and warriors. The princess shared stories of her childhood, of the weight of expectation placed upon her shoulders as the heir to the Syrithian throne. The human warrior spoke of his own struggles, of the sacrifices he had made to protect his people. They found solace in each other's company, a rare reprieve from the relentless demands of war. But their growing connection did not go unnoticed. On both sides, whispers began to spread. The Syrithians questioned their princess's motives, while the humans viewed the warrior with suspicion. Loyalties were tested, and alliances strained as the truth of their relationship came to light. Despite the mounting pressure, the princess and the human warrior refused to abandon what they had found. They knew the odds were against them, but they also knew that their bond was too strong to deny. Together, they began to dream of a different future, a future where their peoples could coexist, where the cycle of war could finally be broken. Their final meeting came during the decisive battle of the war, a massive engagement that would determine the fate of the galaxy. As the two armies clashed, the princess and the human warrior found themselves standing together on a blood-soaked battlefield, their forces united against a common enemy that threatened them both. It was a desperate fight, but their combined strength turned the tide. Together, they led their armies to victory, their bond inspiring their troops and proving that unity was stronger than division. When the dust settled, they stood side by side, their weapons lowered. The war was over, but their journey had only just begun. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges and opposition. But they also knew they would face it together, their shared strength a beacon of hope in a galaxy still healing from the scars of war. And so, the alien princess and the human warrior embarked on a new chapter, one not defined by conflict, but by the promise of a brighter future, together. The galaxy may have quieted its cannons, but the true battle was just beginning. War had a way of cementing hatred in the hearts of the survivors. The princess and the human warrior stood on a fragile bridge between two civilizations scarred by years of bloodshed, and every step forward threatened to plunge them into the abyss. Still, they pressed on. In the days after the final battle, both the Syrithian Dominion and the human coalition convened separately to assess the ramifications of their uneasy ceasefire. The princess returned to the grand war citadel of Syrithia Prime, where towering crystalline spires overlooked the blood-red oceans of her homeworld. Here, the High Council awaited her. The council chamber was an intimidating space, its walls adorned with trophies of past victories, relics of alien species the Dominion had crushed in its relentless expansion. The counselors, an ancient group of advisors, stood in a semicircle, their gazes sharp as daggers. "You fought beside a human," one counselor hissed, her voice laced with accusation. "You dared sully our honor by lowering yourself to their level." Another counselor chimed in, his tone dripping with disdain. "This alliance weakens the Dominion. Our people demand strength, not compromise." The princess, still clad in her battered armor, stepped forward. Her eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, swept over the assembly with regal defiance. "It is not weakness to spare lives when there is a better path," she said firmly. "The humans are not like the others we have conquered. They are tenacious, adaptable, and capable of fighting us to a stalemate. If we continue this war, it will only lead to our mutual annihilation." A murmur spread through the council, but the princess raised a hand to silence them. "I have seen their warrior spirit. I have stood shoulder to shoulder with their finest. If you cannot see the value in peace, then you are blind." The council erupted in protest, but the princess held her ground. Though her position as leader gave her authority, she knew she would have to tread carefully. She had won the battle, but the war for her people's hearts had just begun. On Earth, the human warrior faced his own challenges. The remnants of the coalition leadership were fractured, some eager to embrace the ceasefire, others suspicious of Syrithian intentions. The Council of Generals convened in a massive underground bunker, their voices raised in heated debate. "She's using you," one general spat, his face red with fury. "You've been blinded by their propaganda. They slaughtered billions," another growled. "And you think we can trust them?" The warrior stood tall, his battered armor a testament to the countless battles he had endured. "Do you think I've forgotten what they've done?" he asked, his voice calm but resolute. "I've buried friends, brothers, and sisters because of this war. But I've also seen something you haven't. I've seen their leader. She's not just another conqueror. She's someone who understands the cost of this conflict, someone willing to fight for peace." His words hung in the air, met with stony silence. "If we keep fighting, we'll destroy everything we're trying to protect," he continued. "This is our chance to stop the cycle. If we don't take it, then we're no better than they are." Some of the generals softened, nodding reluctantly, while others remained unconvinced. It was clear that uniting the fractured coalition would be as difficult as convincing the Syrithians. Over the following weeks, the princess and the warrior worked tirelessly to bridge the divide between their people. They met in secret, away from the prying eyes of their respective governments, to coordinate their efforts. In one such meeting, aboard a neutral space station orbiting a dying star, they shared a rare moment of quiet amidst the chaos. "You've put yourself in a dangerous position," the princess said, her voice tinged with concern. "Your people don't trust me." The warrior smirked. "I could say the same for you. Your council would rather see me dead than standing here." She laughed softly, the sound rare and unexpected. It was a laugh that spoke of exhaustion, but also of hope. "They might try," she admitted, her expression softening. "But I've learned something in my time as a leader. Change is never easy, and it's rarely welcome. But it's necessary. Someone has to take the first step. And you think we can make it work?" he asked, his tone serious now. She hesitated, then met his gaze. "I think we have to. If not for us, then for the generations that come after." For a moment, they simply stood there, two warriors from opposite sides of a broken galaxy, united by a shared dream. The road to peace was long and fraught with setbacks. Rogue factions on both sides sought to undermine the fragile ceasefire, launching attacks that threatened to reignite the war. The princess and the warrior worked tirelessly to prevent these incidents from escalating, often putting themselves in harm's way to do so. In one particularly daring mission, they joined forces to rescue a group of human diplomats captured by Syrithian extremists. The operation was a success, but it further strained their already precarious positions within their respective governments. Despite the challenges, their efforts began to bear fruit. Slowly but surely, trust began to build. Cultural exchanges were established, trade routes reopened, and tentative alliances formed. It was a delicate process, like nurturing a fragile sapling in a storm, but the princess and the warrior remained steadfast. Their bond deepened over time, transcending the boundaries of race and history. They found solace in each other, a rare understanding that only those who had lived through the horrors of war could share. Years later, as the galaxy began to heal, the princess and the warrior stood together on a new world, a symbol of the unity they had fought so hard to achieve. The air was crisp, the sky alive with the colors of a twin sunset. They watched in silence as Syrithians and humans worked side by side to build a new city, a beacon of hope for the future. "We've come a long way," the warrior said, his voice filled with quiet pride. The princess nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "And there's still so much to do?" He turned to her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You sound like you're ready for another fight." She smirked, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Always." As they stood there, side by side, they knew their journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to hope. Together, they had defied the odds, forging a bond that transcended war and division. And in that bond, they found the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the years stretched on, the fragile peace between the Syrithians and the humans evolved from a tenuous truce into a stable alliance. The bond between the princess and the warrior had become a cornerstone of this newfound harmony, their actions inspiring countless others to lay down their arms and embrace coexistence. But not everyone embraced this new era. Deep within the shadowy recesses of the galaxy, factions of dissidents from both sides conspired to undermine the alliance. Among the Syrithians, a splinter group called the Purity Vanguards had risen to prominence. They viewed the princess's actions as a betrayal of their ancient traditions, their rhetoric laced with promises of reclaiming Syrithian supremacy. On the human side, remnants of a militant faction known as the Iron Fist harbored deep resentment toward the Syrithians. To them, the princess was a symbol of everything wrong with the alliance, and they sought to sever the bond between the two races by any means necessary. Both groups operated in the shadows, their actions cloaked in secrecy. Sabotage, assassination attempts, and propaganda campaigns began to erode the fragile trust between the Syrithians and humans. The princess and the warrior knew they had to act swiftly. Together, they convened a summit on an uninhabited moon in neutral space, inviting leaders from both civilizations to address the rising tensions. It was a bold move, but they believed it was their best chance to prevent the alliance from crumbling. The summit took place in a massive domed structure made of translucent alloy, allowing the pale light of the moon's distant star to filter through. Representatives from both sides gathered in the central chamber, their expressions a mix of hope and suspicion. The princess opened the proceedings, her voice strong and clear. "I stand before you not as a conqueror, but as a leader who has seen the cost of war," she began. "The alliance we have built is fragile, yes, but it is also our greatest chance for survival. We cannot let the ghosts of our past dictate our future." The warrior stepped forward, his voice steady and commanding. "We all carry scars from the war," he said. "But those scars are a reminder of what we stand to lose if we let hatred guide us. We have a choice: build something better, or fall back into the cycle of destruction." Their words were met with murmurs of agreement, but also with voices of dissent. The leader of the Iron Fist faction, a grizzled veteran named Carter Vale, stood up, his expression hard. "You speak of peace, but you forget the blood spilled by their hands," Vale growled, pointing at the Syrithians. "How can we trust those who sought to annihilate us?" Before the princess could respond, a Syrithian counselor from the Purity Vanguards rose, his glowing markings pulsating with anger. "And why should we lower ourselves to their level?" the counselor sneered. "They are weak, primitive. This alliance is a stain on our honor." Tensions flared, voices rising as the summit threatened to descend into chaos. The princess and the warrior exchanged a glance, their silent communication honed through years of partnership. They knew they needed to act quickly. "Enough," the princess commanded, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "If we cannot even speak without resorting to insults and accusations, then perhaps we are not worthy of the peace we claim to desire." The chamber fell silent, all eyes on her. Before the summit could proceed, a sudden explosion rocked the dome. The translucent walls cracked, and alarms blared as the structure's integrity was compromised. The Purity Vanguards and Iron Fist saboteurs had joined forces in a desperate bid to destroy the Alliance once and for all. Armed infiltrators flooded the chamber, their weapons trained on both Syrithian and human representatives. The princess and the warrior sprang into action, their combat instincts kicking in. She drew her energy blade, its hum slicing through the chaos, while he raised his rifle, covering her as they fought side by side. The battle was intense, the confined space of the dome forcing both sides into close-quarters combat. Representatives who moments earlier had been at odds now fought together, united against a common enemy. The princess moved with her usual grace and precision, cutting down attackers with swift, decisive strikes. The warrior, a whirlwind of strength and determination, held the line, his weapon never missing its mark. Amid the chaos, they found themselves back to back, their movements perfectly synchronized. "Still think we're crazy for trying to make this work," the warrior quipped, his voice strained but laced with humor. "Always," the princess replied with a smirk, her blade deflecting an incoming projectile. "But that's never stopped us before." Their bond, forged in the crucible of war and tempered by years of collaboration, proved unbreakable. Together, they rallied the remaining representatives, turning the tide of the battle. When the last saboteur fell, the dome was in ruins, its walls shattered and open to the pale light of the stars. Despite the destruction, something remarkable had occurred. Syrithians and humans stood side by side, bloodied but united. In the aftermath of the attack, the princess and the warrior addressed the surviving representatives. "What happened here is proof of the challenges we face," the princess said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into her features. "But it is also proof of what we can achieve when we stand together." The warrior stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "The saboteurs wanted to tear us apart, but instead, they've shown us how strong we are when we fight as one. This alliance isn't just an ideal, it's our reality, and it's worth fighting for." The representatives, humbled by the events of the day, nodded in agreement. Slowly but surely, the seeds of trust began to take root once more. Years later, the alliance between the Syrithians and humans became one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Together, they built thriving cities, explored uncharted regions, and forged a legacy of unity. The princess and the warrior remained at the heart of it all, their partnership a symbol of what could be achieved when differences were set aside in pursuit of a common goal. And though their journey had been fraught with trials, they faced each new challenge with the same unwavering resolve that had brought them together in the first place. For in each other, they had found not just an ally, but a reflection of their own strength and a promise of a brighter future.